Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. As I currently work on 5 different videos at once because I have no life, I thought I would do something a little different. It started when I wondered the answer to a question about presidential elections through history and turned into this, a video going over some historical numbers and records over the course of the nation's history. I know this is different from my usual video, so if you're a subscriber and here to indulge me, then thank you. And please be sure to comment and hit that like button. If you're new here, welcome, and please consider subscribing. Let's get started. A logical place to begin is exactly how many presidential elections have there been in the United States anyway? 58, with the first being in 1789, according to Hamilton. I checked. It was right. Next, were there always political parties? Well, in the first elections, no, there were no political parties. In fact, George Washington was adamantly opposed to political parties. But since they were already a thing over in England, it was only a matter of time before they made it to the nation's shores. Washington never officially joined a party while he was president, but viewed the policies of Alexander Hamilton, no, that one, and his Federalist Party favorably. So I guess you could say Washington was on his side. Okay, that was bad. I'll stop now. That's really the only logical explanation for Washington being listed as a Federalist candidate 4 years later, considering he never actually joined. But at that time, you were either pro-Federalist policies or you weren't. The first election where parties were definitely involved was the following election in 1796, the first election after Washington retired, when John Adams ran as the Federalist candidate and Thomas Jefferson ran as the standard bearer for his newly founded Democratic-Republican Party. So what about third parties, you might ask? Well, third parties didn't really become a thing until the 1832 election with the Anti-Masonic Party, whose entire platform was based on the idea that Freemasons were an elitist society running the country. So if you thought conspiracy theory paranoia was new to presidential elections, you'd be wrong. Before that, different factions of the Democratic Republicans, which with the downfall of the Federalists was pretty much the only game in town at that point, would nominate their own candidates and run them against each other. For example, in the 1824 election, the Democratic Republicans had 4 separate candidates, which created a mess that I'll go into in a little bit. Eventually, the parties would head this off by formally nominating one candidate to stop splitting their own vote. Over history, the best third-party performance, by popular vote at least, was Ross Perot's first run in 1992, when he received over 19.7 million votes. However, he didn't win any electoral votes. The most electoral votes collected by a third-party candidate was actually a former president running for a third term, Theodore Roosevelt. He received 88 electoral votes in 1912 when he ran under the banner of his new Progressive or Bull Moose Party. Roosevelt also holds the record for the largest percentage of the popular vote by a third-party candidate with 27.4%. Speaking of electoral votes, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Theodore's cousin, won a record 523 electoral votes in 1936 when he ran for his second term, and is one of only 3 candidates to ever win over 500 electoral votes. The other 2 are Richard Nixon in 1972 and Ronald Reagan in 1984, both also when they ran for their second terms in office. It shouldn't surprise anyone that FDR has a number of records to his name. He's won more presidential elections than anyone, 4, which means he also holds the record for the most nominations by a major party and has won more electoral votes than any other candidate in history, with a staggering 1,876 electoral votes. No one else has even won 1,050. On the flip side of that coin, Roosevelt's Democratic Party, way before Roosevelt, nominated Williams Jennings Bryan 3 times in 1896, 1900, and 1908, and promptly lost all 3 times, more than any other candidate. While Roosevelt came close, there has only been one unanimous elected president, and that comes with an asterisk. George Washington received votes from every elector in the first election back in 1789. But there's a catch. Back then, electors cast 2 ballots for president. The top vote getter would be president, and the number 2 vote getter would be vice president. All 69 electors cast one of their votes for George Washington. The same thing happened 4 years later when all 132 electors cast a vote for Washington. Both times, John Adams finished second. Electors would vote this way until the confusion that was the election of 1800. After that, the rules were changed to one vote for president and one vote for vice president. Only one other president came close to a sweep, and that was James Monroe in 1820. Monroe swept all 21 states, but one elector in New Hampshire felt that George Washington should be the only unanimous president in U.S. history and voted for John Quincy Adams instead. Now, not all presidential records are held by people from World War II and back. The most votes ever cast in one election, for example, happened in the last election. 2016 holds the record with over 136.6 million votes cast for president. The president before that election has a couple of records himself. Barack Obama in 2008 received more votes than any other candidate in a single election in American history, with just under 69.5 million votes. He also holds the record for the most votes in combined elections with 135.4 million votes, and it's not even close. No one else even has over 114 million. Richard Nixon holds the record for the widest popular vote margin of victory by any candidate, winning by nearly 18 million votes in 1972 over Democratic nominee George McGovern. Nixon does not hold the record for the highest percentage of the popular vote in an election, however. Lyndon B. Johnson in 1964 set that record with 61% of the popular vote. Nixon, along with FDR and Warren G. Harding, are the only other candidates, however, to ever receive over 60% of the popular vote. Lastly, the most votes for a single party over all elections combined goes to the Republican Party. While both parties will break the 1 billion, yes, that's billion with a B, votes mark this election, the Republican Party has received the most with just over 999.1 million votes, about 11 million votes more than the Democrats have accumulated. So that's popular vote support, but what about the states themselves? The most times a state has voted for one party is actually a tie. Indiana and Kansas have both voted for the Republican candidates 32 times. The most times a state has voted for the winner, however, is a staggering 47 out of 58 times. That's held by the state of Pennsylvania. On the opposite end of the spectrum, the state voting for the loser the most times is again a tie, but it's a tie between two of the original colonies. Georgia and South Carolina have missed the mark 24 times. The most times that a state has voted for a third-party candidate is also a tie and also in the South. This time, the tie is between Alabama, Louisiana, and Mississippi, the only states to have voted third-party twice. The record for the most consecutive elections for a state voting for the winner is again a tie, but one state is actually ongoing and quite dominant for reasons that I'll explain. Pennsylvania and Ohio hold the record with a streak of 14 straight times of voting for the winner. For Pennsylvania, the streak was from 1828 to 1880, and that one was actually 22 out of 24 elections, dating back to the first election in 1789. For Ohio, the streak is current, beginning back in 1964 with Lyndon B. Johnson, and that gives them a chance to take sole possession of this record this election if they do it again. What is impressive about Ohio is it also holds the next longest streak of 12 straight times, which was from 1896 to 1940. If you follow current elections at all, then you won't be surprised by the answer of which state has had the most electoral votes ever in an election, and that one state is California, which has had 55 electoral votes since 2004. But getting back to faithless electors for a moment, the most faithless electors in one election is also a recent record. In 2016, 7 electors voted for other people than how their state voted, ranging from Bernie Sanders to Native American activist Faith Spotted Eagle, with Colin Powell getting the most votes with 3. It resulted in a case being brought before the Supreme Court just recently to decide whether states would be allowed to punish electors for not voting as instructed by the state's voters. The ruling? They can, which, depending on the penalty, means this record could hold for a really long time. Still, that isn't close to the highest number of candidates to ever receive electoral votes in a single election. That was 1796, the first election after Washington retired, when a whopping 13 candidates received at least one electoral vote. Talk about a crowded field in that one. The fact is, the electoral vote has always been controversial. It was only created to placate smaller states that were afraid of having the nation's politics dominated by the wants and needs of the larger states. The Electoral College was put in place to get them to sign off on the fledgling country's new constitution. The electoral vote has come under particular fire this century, with a strong push to replace it. That's because the number of candidates to win the electoral vote while losing the popular vote currently stands at 5, but 2 of them have happened in the 2000s. John Quincy Adams, Rutherford B. Hayes, Benjamin Harrison, George W. Bush, and Donald Trump are the 5 men who won without winning the popular vote. The worst defeat ever for an incumbent president can be subjective, considering the changes in the importance of the popular vote in choosing the president, the number of 3 candidate races there have been over the years for embattled presidents, and how electors voted in the first 4 elections. But I would say, with probably not a lot of argument, that Jimmy Carter probably received the worst beatdown ever for an incumbent president when he was beaten by Ronald Reagan back in 1980 and received only 49 electoral votes. It was definitely the worst electoral vote showing for an incumbent, so yeah, we'll go with that one. Finally, the lowest popular vote for the winner was also the first election the popular vote actually mattered. John Quincy Adams only received a little over 113,000 votes in 1824. It was also the lowest percentage of the popular vote for a winner at 30.9%. He lost the popular vote to Andrew Jackson, but no one received a majority of electoral votes. That caused the election to be sent to the House, and the House chose Adams, the son of one-term President John Adams, in a disputed election. Because, like so much in life, even elections are circular.